All right. So today on My Uncle Escaped Alcatraz, we have a special guest, Frank AHEARN. Frank's name has come up a few times when we've discussed this case, and he has a unique perspective about this case and role in this case. So, Frank, we want to welcome you onto the podcast. And for our listeners, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us what your expertise is and what you do?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Originally, I was a skip tracer where I located people for a living. And most of the ways I did that was through pretext and social engineering. And so I spent a long time just finding people who didn't want to be found. And then I kind of evolved or changed into where I started doing privacy and disappearing people who wanted to be gone. So it's kind of like I went from one end to the other end. And it's been a pretty interesting ride. That's what I do. It's just you never know who's going to contact me or what their problem is, but it's a cool business.
So, how does one become a skip tracer? How did you evolve into this? I mean, is there training or did you fall into it? I mean, it's very kind of a
Now,
unique task and vocation.
well, you got to remember it was the mid '80s, and so you really didn't have the databases that you have today. And so I worked for a short period of time in an investigative office, and one of the guys, Scott, he was a skip tracer there, and he kind of just introduced me to the basics of it. And I just found it fascinating. But you have to remember, skip tracing back then was pretexting phone companies, banks, police departments, credit card companies, airlines, just totally extracting information. And I just tended to have this unique gift of being able to get somebody on the phone and convincing them to give me what I wanted, posing as either the customer or an employee or something like that.
That's interesting. All right. So tell us a little bit about your connection to the Alcatraz case and how you got involved in it.
Well, I was working with two producers, and they were talking about doing a series about the escape or about escaped prisoners. And so the Alcatraz one just kind of worked out logistically for everybody because I was living in Florida at the time. And so I just found Robert Anglin, one of the brothers, and I contacted him, and I used to go and meet him for lunch, and we used to chat. And then, I met the U.S. Marshal and other people involved and things like that. And so it was just kind of something that was something in motion, but just didn't really get anywhere. And so, but it was a pretty cool time. I enjoyed it. And Robert was like a wonderful man. And I don't know if he's still alive or not, but it was almost like my Tuesday with Maury moment. We'd sit in the diner or wherever we went and just have lunch.
And then what year was this that you connected with him?
Oh God, I can't remember. I have no
Ken,
idea.
do you have any idea what time?
I believe it was like 2006, 2007.
That sounds right, around 2006.
Yeah. So with your Tuesdays with Maury or Tuesdays with Robert discussions, what can you tell us some of the things that he revealed to you? I mean, what were you trying to elicit from him, or was it you just asking open-ended questions and hoping that he would tell you what you needed to hear?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. When I first met him, right, I didn't have like any recording device. When I first met him, it was just me and him in the, I forget where we were.
Hardee's.
Hardee's. Right, it was Hardee's, right. And he asked me to like lift my shirt to make sure I didn't have like a wire on me because he really didn't know who I was, and so there was like a lot of, there was no trust between us, and we just chatted, and eventually he opened up and how it affected the family. They kind of like became local celebrities because of it. And I was just really curious about the brothers, what their lives were like, and then what happened after the escape and everything like that. And the problem is it happened so long ago, and there was just so much. It was hard to decipher fact from fiction or conspiracy or hoax or whatever. But it was more about the personal aspect of the two brothers that escaped, and then just the idea that they might have got out and went to Texas or something of that nature. Then the whole Brazil thing came up. So it just became like this tree, and you just had all these different branches, and they just went wild.
Yeah. So, I mean, at what point did you realize that when he was telling you this information that does this need that you think it needs to be followed up on, or were you just kind of a conduit of just getting information and reporting information?
Well, we're trying to create a storyline through it. Okay. And, but unfortunately, just other than the few people who were still alive, like the U.S. Marshal and some of the relatives, because we ended up coming back and shooting Robert, and he took us to one of the other brothers' house. It was kind of like this beautiful
Carson.
house. Like, who is it?
It was Carson.
Carson, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we had lunch there. So unfortunately, like it was just we just found ourselves in a situation that we couldn't get beyond a certain point of following the lead. You know what I'm saying? The producers were not going to pay to go down to Brazil to look for them. So it was just nothing that we felt that was tangible to just push us, to the next step is what we felt.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Ken, so at this point, obviously, I mean, were you involved in your family's history at this point? Is this after, or is this what's kind of sparked your interest in your family's history to start diving deep into this rabbit hole? Or, I mean, where were you at this point?
2007, I was involved a little bit, not very much. I mean, I was aware. I was not part of the Fred Breezy coming to see the family in '92. I knew about it. As far as like diving into it, that didn't really kind of occur for me until 2012. I had done an interview with a local newspaper that found out that I was related to John and Clarence, maybe like in 2005. But what is so amazing to me with Frank and Uncle Man.
I'm sorry, my dog's just 1 second.
That's okay.
What's really amazing is that not so much that Frank interviewed Uncle Man, it's that Uncle Man even allowed it to occur. He was a very protective individual when it came to his siblings. Anything to do with, I mean, a lot of the family members always believed that he was the one who knew where his brothers were in the early stages of the escape, after the escape, brother. A lot of family always knew, if anyone knew it, it was Uncle Man. And so he was very protective. He didn't do, I was shocked that he did this interview. And I just happened to go across it on the internet one day. I was like, I can't even believe this actually even occurred. And for him to share things, it was totally amazing.
If I could just interrupt a second, it really became like more of a friendly situation. And you're right, he was very close because he told me that before meeting me, I mean, he was used a couple of times by journalists, mm-hmm. and that they weren't honest with what they were looking for. And so, I mean, he was pretty closed off. And, I think he just was at this point where it was just always resurfacing. But I don't think he just ever really trusted anybody.
No, he didn't.
And since we were casual and I didn't really push him, there were some things I did try to push on him, but, not hard. But I mean, eventually I think we just became friendly and he was just open to it.
Yeah.
He was, Uncle Man was a very nice individual.
Very nice.
He was definitely very friendly with you if you wanted to be friends with him. I believe the way that the FBI treated the family at the very beginning of the case, and then eventually how the U.S. Marshals came in, and they probably were not as heavy-handed as the FBI, but they were definitely still there investigating following the FBI's closing of their case. And so he was very protective. He always suspected that someone was trying to locate his brothers. And in fact, I believe he even asked you, are you here to to arrest find my brothers and have them arrested. So
Yeah,
I mean,
I told
he
him,
was
well, find them,
always
but
leery
you know,
about that.
if they're in Brazil, it's no problem. But we also offered the idea. I forget how old they would have been at that point at 2006. I mean, they probably wouldn't have gone back to jail. They were just so old at that point, and I don't think that was. We offered like lawyers if needed and things like that. So, but I think he just enjoyed chatting about it to a certain degree, and that was like the level he was going at, nothing beyond that. I don't think he was going to ever reveal any big secret.
No, he would never have done that.
So, Frank, did he reveal to you that they were in Brazil, or did you know that beforehand?
No, I knew that beforehand, that there was possibly that Brazil connection. But the thing with that was, I mean, that was a sighting. It was supposedly maybe a child or something like that. I don't remember. But the problem with sightings, you take them 50-50. You just don't know how accurate they are.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't he offer to show you a Brazil postcard that came from Clarence?
Yeah, he said his cousin or sister in Georgia had it or something like that.
No, he actually has it or had it.
See, when I was talking to him, he said that somebody in Georgia had the postcard, and it was a woman, a female, and that because I offered him like, I don't know, like $5,000 or something like that just to see it.
But that would be my mom.
Is your mom?
Yes.
What city in Georgia? Because I remember by the city name.
It would be Albany or Lee County or Leesburg, Georgia.
I think Leesburg is what he said.
that would be my mom.
Right. So he said your mother had the postcard, but it just never materialized.
Yeah. So, about how many sessions did you have with Robert?
5, 7, 8 times. Probably about 7 or 8 times.
Mm-hmm. Did you always meet at that Hardee's, or did you meet at different places? I mean,
yeah, I used to go pick him up, and then we would drive to Hardee's. He liked Hardee's, so we were just kind of like hang out there. It was close by.
Yeah. So, what was going through your mind when he was telling us all this stuff? I mean, does anything you had an experience of hunting for people and tracing them down? I mean, I would think this would be kind of on par with kind of a huge get if you could find these guys.
Oh yeah, I mean it would be an amazing get, but there's the reality of the skip tracer in me, and I understand people when they disappear, because some of the problems on the other side, the problems are that you take someone like Frank Lee Morris, who was just a consummate criminal. How come he was never arrested after the fact? How come none of them resorted to crime? When that's how they earned, and could they really finance this? So it's always this battle of they disappeared, they got away with it, but then it's like, yeah, but how did they stay under the radar? How did they exist? So I was trying to just deal with both ends of things. And the brothers, 2 small town guys, I just would find it very difficult that they did go down to Brazil. I think if anything, they would have just been closer to, the Florida area, because most people escape from prison or, jump bail, end up just going back to the old neighborhood. Most of them do that because they just can't. They don't know how to exist outside of that. So I was looking for the things that would just get me past the skepticism.
Ken, did you ever see that postcard from Brazil?
I don't ever remember seeing a postcard from Brazil. The only postcard that I have in my possession is the one that came from Canada, from Ruth. As far as any from Brazil, I've never seen one.
I mean, the fact that they went to California when they were so young before all of this happened, right. Do you think that they would have been more apt to go to Mexico or to Brazil, Ken, because they had that spirit of just like, we got to get out of here?
Well, it's kind of like, if you go back to what Whitey Bulger said in one of his letters, they were not escaping Alcatraz. They were escaping going back to Alabama. They feared that state prison. And Frank Morris feared going back to Angola. So, that I really believe that of all of the previous escapes that they used to do when they were kids or when they were young, very young men in state prisons, and they always went back. Frank's right. Every time they escaped, they went back home. That was their destination. And the authorities always knew where they could find them at home. But I really believe that they finally crossed that line that they couldn't go back home. And that's the reason why my grandfather told them in their state trial after they were given 25 years rather than the death penalty. When you leave, if you get out, do not come home. Leave this country. Don't ever come back. And, Whitey Bulger said that he gave them this information just like he gave to Mickey Cohen. If you get out, or when you get out, flee to Brazil, marry a local woman, have children, and you can never be extradited back to the U.S. That's what most of the people in prison, that was where they were heading to, was Brazil. So for people to say, well, I don't know how and why they would have gone down there, that was the destination that just about everybody in prison, if they could have gotten out, that's where they were heading to.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense as far as like, a getaway plan, but it comes down to the fact of you still have three people that, I mean, Frank Morris, how come, they commit crimes. That's the problem with escaped criminals. In order to get away and to continue that getaway, they have to have funds, and the funds
Right.
typically comes from committing crimes. And so that's kind of like the questionable aspect of it. And Frank Morris is just a total criminal.
Right.
I think if anything, he would have resurfaced in life, because I don't think he would have decided to go straight all of a sudden. Because once you're out of prison when you're out of prison for X amount of time, it wears off. You're not going to get caught this time. You're not going back.
Well, that's where me and Mike uncovered that they actually had. You're right. And I agree with Art on this part of it when we used to have debates. If they had just simply got to the mainland and they had absolutely no help from that point on, they would have been caught probably within a few days or maybe a month or next year, because you have no help, you have no money, you have to eat, you have to travel, and you can't just do that if you don't have help. And that's the reason why they did have help. And that's what we've uncovered. Not only did they have someone in an airplane that flew them out of the country that night into Mexico, the very next morning they were in Mexico, fueling up their plane. And according to what John told Fred, not only did they have change of clothes, but they had money in their pocket. Someone had financed them cash. And according to what we know, what happened?
Ken just froze there.
Oh,
You're back.
I came back.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know what happened, but something happened.
Yeah, no, we lost your video, but we can hear you. So Frank, while you're trying to restart there, Ken, Frank, so what did you know about the method in which they escaped and the fact that they had some assistance and on the inside and on the outside? How much of that history did you have, or if you didn't have it, when you spoke to Robert?
No, I had a lot of it, because the producer that I was working with, he actually did a story earlier, several years beforehand, and he actually interviewed some of the people that were like still alive from Alcatraz as well. The thing is, it just becomes very elaborate, the escape, and sometimes that just creates, it just fills the gaps in the punching of the holes in the story, or where people went. And just everything that I learned was just coming from this point of view of this conspiracy I understood another story too, where they actually drove to Texas, that they got on the mainland there, and then they ended up driving through Texas, and somebody supposedly in Texas got into the Mexican border. That's the story that I originally heard.
Mm-hmm. And who told you that story? If you can remember.
I don't remember.
Mm-hmm. Was it someone that was inside Alcatraz with them, or was it like
no
just someone who?
I mean, the producer might have extracted it from somebody he interviewed, but I mean, I just think that was like one of the working theories that they got through Texas.
Yeah, because Ken, had you ever heard it, or Mike, have you ever heard of the theory about the Texas theory? Because based upon the research we've never heard anything like that, and I don't think we spoke to.
Because some woman came out a few years ago who basically said that, I think she said she met Clarence, and it was in Texas, and that her father basically drove them to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I'm 100% sure.
Never heard that story.
Yeah,
like I said, the only thing that we and Mike and I, like I said, we did a lot of in-depth, detailed digging. Probably, the only people that really, when you look at the story, is their friend. The individual who flew them out of the country, who grew up with them, who spent time in other prisons with them. Then you have Uncle Man going to Alfred in the Atlanta penitentiary when he's there, and he's the one who tells him Mickey Cohen is the one who helped them get out, who financed it, brother. Not so much helped them get out, but financed it. So, I mean, you start putting all these kind of little small pieces together, and yeah, I agree. I agree with Frank. It sounds elaborate, but you got to remember how elaborate was this whole escape process to begin with that they did. I mean, you go back and you look at the detail that they did in putting the escape to get in place in a prison. That was elaborate in itself.
No, I understand that. I mean, listen, most prison escapes, have a certain amount of amazing aspects to them. Where most prisoners fail is once they're over that wall, most of them don't have a plan. I'm not saying the brothers and Frank Morris didn't, and it's hard to create that plan after the fact, because most prisoners get over that wall and it's like, what do I do now? That's why they always set up, the perimeters around, X amount of miles to capture people. But I think one of the things we ran into was there was just so many different ideas and theories, and, it was hard to pick or find something solid like, okay, this is the one. This is probably how they did it. Because we were looking at the aspect that they drove, and again, they were into Texas and somebody took them into Mexico.
Yeah. I would think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, if there was probably a nationwide manhunt for them at that point. And I don't think it was just, I mean, was it just localized to the California area?
No, I think it was huge.
Yeah,
it was.
So they were looking all over. I think them driving out, they probably would have been picked up by someone, especially especially in the borders. I'm sure they were looking at the borders, but that's just my feeling. I think so. Frank, what I wanted to ask you is so what did Robert tell you? I mean, what are some of the things that he told you that, and I know it sounds like he didn't give you enough to kind of support whatever the Brazil theory is, and how, what was he telling you? What was he spoon feeding you? I mean, it sounded like you guys got together.
He never out and out said he knew. Okay. Sometimes, through the conversation, he would imply, and because he said did he visit Clarence in Alcatraz? Did he go to Alcatraz, Robert?
No. No one from the family ever made it out there.
I guess before. Either.
But he did go visit the third brother, which was
the third brother, right?
Yeah,
so
that was
brother. Right. He said he visited a third brother, and third brother told them that they were escaping before they escaped.
Yes.
Is what he found out from the third brother.
Which is what he told them.
Right. But when I pushed him for like, where are they, or things like, something solid, he just, didn't go there. And, I wasn't you can only ask so much. And I don't want to push him and say, tell me, or, this or that. I just basically said, look, if you know where they're at, we can make arrangements, with lawyers, and, they probably won't go to prison. Just some sort of, compensation that, wasn't about finding them and just like exposing them.
I don't believe that he was, he was definitely concerned about John and Clarence, his brothers. I think he saw what happened to Alfred by Alfred having contact with them, what ultimately happened to him, which is his death. But
oh, right, I forgot about that.
All of the threats that came from the FBI early on. You can read it in the FBI files. It's not just hearsay from other family members.
Oh no, he told me that it was horrible.
They threatened every single one of them. If you have any knowledge of where they're at, if we find out that you had the knowledge and you didn't share it with us, every one of them were threatened with jail time. So, think about all these years they've been threatened that way every time they got interviewed. And now all of a sudden, if he happened to have known where they were at, if he did, but someone says, well, we can help them, once they get here, we'll set them up with lawyers and, we can probably get them out. What do you think the FBI would have done to him, being as he knew where they were at all these years?
Well, I don't think
they've been threatening him with, so it wouldn't be just them going to jail. There would be other family members that would have gone to jail.
Well, no, I think because I think law enforcement popped up every so often in their life just to stop by. So I think there was always that concern of, who's who. But I remember the thing, he told me that a journalist approached him, and that
was Don DeNevy. Don DeNevy.
Oh, right. Who wrote that
book? He was writing a book. He's the author who. Go ahead.
He said they were just totally ripped them off and just lied to him about everything.
Well, what the family didn't know, we found this out in 2015 when we were working with Art Roderick, who you know Art. Well, we happened, and you remember last week, Art even verified that this happened. Okay. That author that was writing that book with them in the early 1990s, he had contacted the family and said, hey, we're going to write this book and we're going to let you tell your story and we're going to help your brothers. We're going to locate them. We're going to get them. I think Melvin Belli had even, at that time, he was alive and he was going to represent them. But what the family didn't know was this author, as he met with them, he was going to meet with Art Roderick right afterwards. And he was sharing everything that they were telling him that he was writing in this book. He was sharing with the U.S. Marshals.
Oh,
which they didn't even know that happened.
Matter of fact,
we didn't find out about it too much later.
I think about a year or two before I met Robert, he actually told me that the marshals came to his home and they brought him to the office. Right.
Yep. And gave him a polygraph.
Exactly. Right. Gave him the polygraph test. You're thinking, God, man, poor old guy, leave him alone, man.
Well, out of all of the family members, Uncle Man is the only one they've ever polygraphed. And they polygraphed him twice. The FBI polygraphed him and the U.S. Marshals polygraphed him. And that's because when you read what we found in the FBI files, Uncle Man goes to his brother, Alfred, when he was still in Atlanta prison, and told them that they made it and knew where they were at and who helped. That's the reason why the FBI and the U.S. Marshals were so interested in Uncle Man.
Wow.
He knew where they were and what happened and how it happened.
So, hey, Frank, were you aware of Fred Breezy at the time that you met with Robert? And did you know who he was and what his role?
I don't recognize the name now.
Okay. All right. Well, Fred Breezy was the childhood friend of all of those young, both Robert, John, Clarence, Alfred, that grew up in the Ruskin area. And he eventually he used to run with them, came from a different family. And then his father told him to go get his pilot's license because he didn't want him hanging out with these guys anymore. He eventually got his pilot's license and ended up starting to fly, and they moved into Mexico, got connected to Mickey Cohen somehow, and was doing drugs runs over the border, flying in and out. And then he came back, and he was the one who introduced the Anglin brothers to Mickey Cohen because he knew that those guys could grow. They could grow. They were farmers. They could grow weed and marijuana, and so they had that connection. Did Robert tell you anything about what they had done in the past to make money, or was your conversation strictly?
No. I mean, he talked about them, just breaking in robberies and stuff like that. The whole Route 66 trip, they're just robbing things along the way. I mean, that's basically what he told me, and he told me about the whole bank robbery thing. But yeah, they were just robbers and just stick up kids.
Yeah. So at what point did you end the conversation with him, and how did you leave it with him? And were you the one that convinced him to go on camera?
Yeah, I said, listen, another producer would like to meet you, and we'll just spend the day. We'll just drive around, nothing in particular. And that's when he was like, okay. And so we did that, and we went to. I'm sorry. What was his brother's name?
Carson.
Carson, right? We spoke with Carson, and there was a woman there as well, I believe. And we just hung out, had some coffee, and we just spent the day just cruising around, trying to get some information and just seeing where it would go. But again, he was open, but there was no, nothing that enlightened us to bring it forward.
Okay. So you guys left there basically saying you almost as you went in with more questions and answers.
It wasn't so much that. I mean, we're looking at it from the structure of a TV series where, there's no resolution at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to do Geraldo's safe, you know what I'm saying? And, that's really what it comes down to. I mean, it was a question of dollars and cents for the production company.
Yeah. So you guys made no effort to try to hire someone down there to see if you can find them? Or did you have not, if to find them in Brazil? I mean, you just knew that they could possibly be in Brazil and that it was cost prohibitive to go down there?
It was just, there wasn't enough to go on. I mean, it was just basically a possible sighting. Okay. And, that's just not enough to really go after someone.
Frank, in that document that I read and you shared with me, at the very end, you talk about going and working with one of the marshals on the TV show. I think they were doing a TV show. They were trying to do, what's that TV show with the mystery?
Unsolved Mysteries?
Unsolved Mysteries. I believe it was Unsolved Mysteries. Now, did you ever work with Art Roderick?
No, actually, the producer I was working with actually produced that and directed it, I believe.
And Art was on it because Art's told us he was the U.S. Marshal that was on that show.
Right. I met with him, with the producer, correct.
Okay. And from my understanding, that's when, that is whenever Fred Breezy he's the one who calls in and talks to Art. Art, there is a in that segment as they're doing this, trying to get any type of information.
Well, I think that was America's Most Wanted. He called
America's Most Wanted. Okay, yeah. Fred Breezy is the one who calls in and talks to Art, and then, according to what you also said, the U.S. Marshals then went down to this bar that someone had identified or saw someone in this bar. Is that correct? Because I think that's what was in your write-up.
Vaguely. I don't remember exactly what it was.
Yeah. Well, Frank,
I'm sorry.
Let me ask you a hypothetical here. Say we hired you to find them. This is what you do. You find people that disappear. I don't know if that's, in this kind of electronic age and this where we are right now, where everyone's got a digital footprint, maybe not down in Brazil, but how would you tackle that? How would you go about finding them based upon all this information that we have right now? Because we're actually actively doing that right now.
Well, the thing is, I mean, you can forget the digital part because they're just not going to be there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, especially if they're in Brazil or were in Brazil, it's really, this is like a pound the pavement situation where you have to then just take the best possible leads, and if it's in Brazil, you need something to go on. I don't know what you guys actually uncovered. If you uncovered more, it would be about just being down there and just hitting up, supposed places where they hung out, where they lived, and just trying to find, some piece of information that brings you to the next piece of information. Because I mean, you're not going to find them on Facebook or anything like that, or
Frank,
anything digital.
Let me ask you this: are you aware that we have a photo of them down in Brazil in the 1970s?
No, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. We in the shows that we've done, and the last one we did with Josh Gates on Expedition Unknown, we went to Brazil.
Okay.
And we actually found the farm where they were living at one time. I don't know whether or not they're still there, but we do have a photo that has been analyzed by multiple agencies. The U.S. Marshals have looked at it. The FBI has looked at it. 5 independent companies have looked at it and have all come back and positively ID'd John Anglin in that photograph in the 1970s in Brazil.
Wow.
So they definitely did make it to Brazil. Now, what happened to them after they got there? That's what we're trying to find out.
Yeah, and then we also, I mean, from what Ken and Mike have found out, is that not only they make it, but they followed the Whitey's instructions, got married, and had kids.
Yes.
And one of them had 3 kids, the other one had 4. So and knowing that kind of information, Frank, what could you do with your skill set to at least, if not?
Yeah, but I mean, other than the photo, I mean, are there names?
We have the location of where the farm's at.
But you went down there to the farm?
Oh yeah, we went down there. And but with the show with Expedition Unknown, it was more of it wasn't really I don't know if you know Josh Gates. He's not really there to, I mean, he is there to find stuff, but we only had a limited amount of time, and we really needed more time.
Yeah. And it's all about the journey for him. It's not about what you find.
Yes.
It's all about.
No, it's about Josh.
What did you find on the farm?
Well, what we did find is we found people that remember 3 Americans being there, showing up in the late 60s, early 70s. We did find where that photo was taken on their farm. Breezy, who is the person who, their friend who flew them out of San Francisco that night and into Mexico and eventually into Brazil, is the one who kept in touch with them the whole time. He's the one who, along with Uncle Man, is the connection between them and the family over the years. We did find the house that they used to live in. We found the little town that they started off in. We found the farm area. We found a lot of places, but we never found, well, we didn't, like I said, we were only there for a few days. So we know the general area. We just we didn't have the people to put boots on the ground and investigate actual people. Because you got to remember, they went down there and they didn't go down there using John Anglin and Clarence Anglin and Frank Morris's name. So they definitely had different names.
Where did the photo come from?
The photo was given to us by Fred Breezy. He is the one who went down there, and he's the one that got picked up by Art Roderick on the show. He's the one who called in. And he gave us that photo along with several other photos.
Yeah. I mean, photos of Fred in Brazil.
And also John's wife.
And
We
John's
have a
wife.
picture of John, what John's wife looks like.
Interesting.
Yeah,
wild.
and also like landscape photographs of the area.
Mhm.
So like where they, the area they lived in, the house they lived in, and so there's identifiable marks. So
And we found every one of these when we went down there.
And you weren't able to kind of connect to any
Well,
people?
we didn't have enough time. And that was what we wanted to. Mike and I wanted to go up to these doors and knock on these doors. I wanted to go out to the farm and actually go to some of these bars that are there. You remember we talk about a bar, right? Well, there's like several bars right next to this farm. And I wanted to go out there and talk to them. Couldn't talk Josh and them into doing it.
Mm.
All, they were interested in.
That's
filming.
crazy. I mean, you're that close, supposedly. And
asked Mike. I was like, Mike, maybe we should just let Josh go home and we'll stay here.
Yeah.
And you go back.
that's what I would have done.
Hey, yeah.
We're standing in front of the house. We're looking at a picture of the house as it was taken in the 1970s. And then we're looking at it and it's, the exact same location. You can't miss it. And we're saying, Josh, let's just go up there. Let's just go up there and just see. And he goes,
Yes.
No, we have to go. We have to leave now. We have a schedule to keep. And that was the end of it.
oh my gosh, terrible.
I don't know. Rob and I are different type of TV producers. We would have been banging on the door in the middle of the night.
Hey, I tell you what,
we've gone up to people's houses when we're producing shows, and we're just like, okay, even if the schedule, we've called the head of the network and said, hey, we got a hot lead, we got to stay, and they let us stay. So I don't know. That's.
I tried to tell them, let's go to this farm and check it out. And
I mean, the idea basically is, if they had kids hitting the schools,
yes.
Yeah.
check, if there's yearbooks, things like that, it's going to be all paper,
Yeah.
Yeah. We also have. We also go ahead. Susan.
We have a genealogist who does that show Find Your Roots, working on it in Brazil right now for us. So
someone in Brazil.
He's found a bunch of stuff, and we're just vetting out all that stuff right now.
What was really unique is a photograph of someone who would be Ken's cousin, and from this person,
It looks just like
and
him.
it's a dead ringer for Ken.
I thought it was Ken.
We thought it was Ken.
I was like, "Is this you?" He's like, "No."
So we definitely feel the gene pool is floating around down there.
And the names. We've come across a few names.
How many Brazilian people named Clarence as their first name?
Right. I mean, the interesting part would be to find out any Anglo names, names
And it wasn't
to schools or hospitals.
It wasn't just Clarence. There was some, like George was one, and I think wasn't that a family name too?
Yeah. Well, that was my grandfather. His name
was George. There's like several names from the family.
Was Rachel Van Doren, which we found one very similar to that name.
It's interesting.
Pretty exciting information.
Yeah.
God, I can't believe the producer just didn't.
I know. We would never do that. I mean, that's just crazy.
I mean, it's like possible sighting of like Jimmy Hoffa, be like, I'm just not gonna go knock on the door.
Exactly. We got I got a meeting in 2 hours. We can't make it.
It's okay.
Crazy.
It wasn't meant to be with them.
Exactly, it wasn't. So it's.
I mean, like what you're explaining. I mean, those are solid things to look at. I mean, especially, if the picture is them.
Oh, it's them. It's definitely them.
Right. I'm saying if it's them, and you have a location, I don't think it'd be very difficult to find at least if they did have children, because you don't look for them, you look for the children.
Right.
Yeah,
that's the key.
That's what we've been doing.
And the grandchildren.
Yeah, and the grandchildren. Yeah. At this point,
I'm assuming it's like in the middle of nowhere, some countryside as opposed to Rio or something.
Well,
like that.
yeah. Even right now, it's a very remote area. Now, the town that they used to live next to, which was fairly large now, back in the 1970s and the early late 60s. I mean, it was really small. So it was a very remote, rural area of the country. So, Frank,
dog wrangling.
My wayward dog.
Well, and even Fred Breezy talks about when he met with the family in '92. he specifically mentions that the place that he goes to meet with the brothers on their farm was very, very remote. And as he put it, the law hadn't reached that town yet. It was just sort of this unincorporated area where you just kind of made your own rules. That's how remote it was.
I mean,
Well,
it's super
and the
difficult
farm was
finding
very, very large, according to Fred. I mean, they were he was kind of joking around that the brothers got into an argument about exactly how large it was, but it was huge. And they had a large number of people that worked on the farm. And in fact, they even set up a little small town that housed the people that worked on the farm for them. So that's the reason why I kept telling Josh, if we go to these bars, you're going to find someone who's older there, possibly worked on this farm or knew someone who worked on a farm that Americans owned. And we just never could get him to do this.
Yeah, I mean, gringos would stick out like a sore thumb down there at that time. And to get to the point where you said earlier that most escapees are captured because they don't have resources, and if they did have any kind of money or something like that, once that runs out, they're going to go to a life of crime. Both Charles and Clarence were trained farmers.
Yes.
So they knew how to make a living off the land. They were really skilled at it. For us, it really kind of fits perfect to where they went and what they created to go to a rural area. I mean, they were raised dirt poor with nothing. They always had to make ends meet themselves. So they weren't like a traditional Frank Morris who was a thug and a criminal and didn't really have any skill set outside of that. I mean, genuinely, both the Anglin brothers, they grew up in a God-fearing, healthy family environment. They just were poor, and they were tired of being poor, and so they had to steal in order to get the same means as their friends, so they wouldn't be chastised or bullied and stuff like that. And then they realized they took it to the next level and they robbed a bank. But that robbing that bank was a means to the end, because they had already tasted some of the cash that they were making from Mickey Cohen growing the weed. Mm-hmm. And then that was taken away from them because Cohen was thrown in prison for tax evasion by the Kennedy administration. So then they had to figure out, what do we do now? And they said, well, I like the feeling of all this money. And that's when Alfred decided, hey, listen, I know this rural bank in Alabama that we could knock off real easy. We won't get any resistance. We'll use a fake gun. It'll be easy cheesy. And they would have gotten away with it hadn't someone, one of the girlfriend's ex-husband didn't blow the whistle. So, there's a distinction between Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, clearly.
I think the worst part about this whole thing is that sentencing they got was horrific.
Yes.
I mean, just unbelievable, like 25 years.
Well, they actually wanted to give them the death penalty.
No, I get that. They're lucky they didn't get that. But, I mean, to be sentenced to 25 years for, like, one bank robbery?
Right.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
And nobody was after they got their federal time.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was actually closer to 40 years because they had federal and state. They were tried twice for the same crime.
Oh, right. Horrible.
Yep, very horrible.
Yeah, they had an axe to grind. They were pissed. So that was obviously they were sending a statement. Based upon some of this information that we've just kind of revealed to you, Frank, I mean, having that kind of information, you said that those are all actionable leads. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. My focus would be not so much on the brothers, but focusing on the children.
Yeah,
they're the ones who are gonna have the footprint.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in all likelihood, they're probably passed on. The brothers, they late 90s,
and everybody's gonna know, the half-white kids.
Yeah.
In the schools, because that's really where the focus has gone. I mean, if you're saying everything you're saying, if it's correct, and they did live there, the schools are gonna basically people, whatever ages you think they would be now, they're going to know them.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to.
Well, there's also, Ken, you can tell them a little bit about the correspondence that your family had from them from Canada. at that time down there. That also, which means that they got paperwork.
Yes.
Because they were able to travel internationally. And
I'm not sure if this is the postcard that maybe that Uncle Man was talking about. It's very interesting because my mom got a postcard from one of the sisters, one of the girlfriends. Supposedly, she thought it was one of the girlfriends of John and Clarence before they went to prison, before they got in trouble. They were both dating. One was a lady by the name of Ruth, and Helen, who John would actually wind up painting in prison during the escape so that he could get paint for the dummy heads. But so anyway, my mom gets a postcard from Ruth out of Canada, and she got it right before my grandmother dies. And she didn't even know Ruth. She didn't know who. I mean, she knew her, but she not really knew her. And the postcard goes just like this: says, "Hey, how are you doing? We're having a great time up here in Canada, or wherever they were. I think this is Canada.
Montreal.
We're having a great time. Are you still at your mom's house?" No one would have known she was there. And it basically kind of ended it like this. So we assumed that this was Ruth, Helen's sister, but now we're finding out that might not actually be the Ruth we're thinking of. It might be John's wife from Brazil. So maybe, we found out that John's wife actually has connections and relatives that lives in Canada.
Wow. I would still just basically focus on the children in Brazil, because if anything, that's the closest you have to a confirmation of something. A postcard's just a postcard, and the truth is you just never really know the truth of that postcard.
Yeah, but if Uncle Man knew about that postcard and he knew it came from Clarence, because according to what you wrote in that document, because I've read it, and I read it again the other day just so I could have it fresh in my memory. Uncle Man tells you, he says, by any Hollywood standard, it would be a postcard from Brazil with Clarence's signature on it. And you, I think, offered $20,000 to see it.
Actually, I think it was 20,000. Oh yeah, absolutely.
And then Uncle Man said, "Well, it's been misplaced."
Right, but see, at this point, I would just forget about all the other information and just focus on the children.
Well, one of the things that Ken didn't mention about Canada is that the family that Rob and Cindy are looking at right now, part of the family is in Brazil, in the area where the brothers lived for a time. And part of the family has moved up to Canada in the Montreal area.
From Brazil.
From Brazil. So it's a little bit of a stronger connection than just a random family.
With similar names. I'm not going to say what they are right now, but it is very, they're very interesting.
From the Anglin family and giving them to the children.
Interesting. Well, you developed a lot of information and information that's actionable. And that's really the most important thing.
Well, I think that's important too. Because there's been conspiracy theories about this. Let's be clear. This is one of the biggest true crime cases in the last 100 years that's never really been resolved.
Right. Nobody wants you to resolve it because everybody loves the theory of it.
Well, that too. I think part of it, I think the government didn't really want it resolved to a certain degree until, even we spoke with Art last week. Their stance is it's still an open case. Their stance is they believe that they died in the bay, drowning, and they're sticking to that. And I understand why they're sticking to that, because they don't have, as far as they're concerned, it's easier for them to keep it that way, and it kind of wraps it up in a nice little bow for them. So they just, as far as what we know about the case is when it reaches the 100-year mark, then it just kind of goes into goes into a friggin' box and it goes into that vault that they,
Right. I think they come off the list when they reach 100 years old.
Yeah.
Each of them.
But and even Art said even if they were found today, nothing would happen to them. And but at the same point, at that juncture, there was a lot of shit going down in the United States in 1962. There was a lot of craziness, and not much unlike what we're dealing with today. With all this stuff, but it was a huge embarrassment for the prison system, the government, and all them. Not being able to, solve this quickly. So and the more Ken and Mike have dug into this, I mean, there's a lot of layers here. I mean, just the layer about the whole Mickey Cohen when he was in Alcatraz, how he was bonded out by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court for like 6 months. And then he was on the outside for 6 months and he comes back. And how long after he comes back that those guys escape, and that, and he was believed to set up the boat that was in the bay for them to escape it. So in which that's part of the conversations that Ken has found and information he's found. So there's a lot of things going on here. And yeah, and when you're dealing with the federal government, obviously there's a lot of layers there, and there's a lot of whitewashing to a degree. So this was a big embarrassment for him. So I can understand why they wouldn't want to unearth it.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
But it'd be an amazing story if it was.
Yeah. Well, we think it is an amazing story, and I think we're pretty close to kind of closing the loop on it. We're hopefully, we can find those family members, and we have Ken's DNA. I mean, the U.S. Marshals have his DNA. I mean, you can't deny that. If we find a DNA match to someone, and Ken, other than the time that you went for the show, you had never been to Brazil, correct?
That was my first time.
And you were married when you were in Brazil, correct?
That's correct.
So you didn't have any relations with anybody in Brazil when you were down there to kind of create
correct.
some other DNA.
That's
So
correct.
We'll talk about that.
So I don't know. I just think it's. I think both Mike and Ken did an amazing. I don't know if you've read the book yet.
No, don't pick it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think for someone who's, I mean, you've had your fingers in this case, and really at a significant point too, and you actually got to talk to Robert, who, my God, he's a guy that I would love to be alive today, who I would love to really, ask him a ton of questions, because based upon everything that Ken has found out through his family and the reports, he was the linchpin to all the communications there, and had he not gotten married when he did, he probably would have been involved with the brothers on all their escapades and stuff. So he was like the fourth member of their team that just, it's an incredible story. And so I wish I'm really jealous you got to talk to him. And so what did he end up revealing in that interview? Was it just background information about the brothers?
It was pretty much all the same stuff that, me and him spoke about, and the working theory was that they got onto the mainland, people met them there, and, well, he never admitted, he never said this is what happened. I think what he was more so talking about the ideas that were out there. So he never committed to knowing anything, but he mentioned like the postcard. And so I think what it was more so him talking about the ideas that other people put out there.
Yeah.
Because I think he was just so afraid of putting himself in jeopardy.
Sure.
And putting his brother, I think he was more
his family,
his brothers in jeopardy than himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, this is crazy. All right. Well, listen. Hey, we after you read the book, we'd love to have you on, because I think that.
Sure.
And I'd love to hear your perspective, and we'd love to, bounce some ideas off of you as well. And and if the more information we get from South America, we're still actively talking to these guys, and we have people down there working. Obviously, we'd love to hear your perspective and any kind of guidance you can give us in tracking people down, since that's what you do.
Yeah, I'll order the book next week. I'll give you my thoughts.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Take
right,
care.
well, listen.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Take care.